The morning of the sentencing dawned gray and heavy over Beijing, as if the city itself knew the weight of the hours ahead. Outside the Chaoyang District People's Court, thousands of mourners, fans, and reporters gathered in a restless sea of banners, candles, and camera flashes. A giant screen erected across the square prepared to stream what the nation had been waiting for, the live video of the sentencing in the Menglong murder case. Inside, in a packed courtroom buzzing with tension, the four accused sat stiffly on the defendant's bench. All eyes were on Zhang Yuxuan, the man identified as the mastermind behind the crime, who would soon learn his fate. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with expectation and fury. Officials moved with solemn precision, while police officers stood guard at every door, their uniforms a stark reminder of the gravity of the moment. Families of the accused sat rigid, pale-faced, clutching tissues in nervous hands. But it was the presence of Menglong's family, his mother, his father, his younger sister, that drew the sharpest focus. Their faces were hollowed by grief, but hardened by the resolve to finally hear the words that would bring some measure of justice. Next to them sat Xingfei, the woman who had shared Yu's final months. Clutching a folded handkerchief and staring straight ahead with eyes brimming with tears she refused to shed just yet. The judge entered, the room rising in unison. The gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber. Silence swept across the court, broken only by the faint clicks of cameras capturing every detail. The presiding judge, a stern figure in a black robe with red trim, adjusted his glasses and began with the formalities. His voice deep and steady. The charges were recited: premeditated murder, conspiracy, destruction of evidence. The accused shifted uneasily, though Zhang Yuxuan alone seemed carved from stone, his expression unreadable, gaze fixed on some point beyond the courtroom. As the prosecution laid out its final summary, the story of Menglong's death unfolded once more for the public, this time with the weight of undeniable evidence. The prosecutor spoke with measured force, outlining the events of that September night when Yu fell from his apartment building in Chaoyang. At first labeled an accident, the truth had surfaced through his diary, his unsent text messages, and the courage of witnesses who dared to speak. This was no accident, the prosecutor declared, slamming a hand on the table. This was a calculated act, designed to silence a young man whose only crime was resisting pressure and protecting his integrity. The evidence was overwhelming. CCTV footage, painstakingly restored, showed a shadowed figure leaving the building moments after Yu's fall. Witnesses recalled arguments, the sound of a struggle, the suspicious disappearance of critical security footage. Financial records traced how lucrative contracts and endorsements, once belonging to Yu, flowed swiftly into the portfolios of clients managed by Zhang Yuxuan. The pattern was undeniable. Yu's death cleared a path for profit. Each word seemed to draw the noose tighter around Zhang Yuxuan. Yet he sat motionless, jaw clenched, hands folded, his eyes never betraying fear or remorse. By contrast, the three accomplices, two men and a woman, all much younger, shifted nervously, their eyes darting toward the judge as if searching for mercy. One bit his lip until it bled. Another clutched the rail before him so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Then came the testimony of Menglong's family, their voices trembling but resolute. Another described the agony of losing her son, the silence in his bedroom, the projects he would never complete. Son begged for help in his diary, she said, her voice breaking. He told us he was being followed. He told us he was afraid. And no one listened. Now you must listen. Give him the justice he deserves. Her words rippled through the courtroom, and even the judge paused before continuing, as if the weight of her grief demanded acknowledgement. The defense attempted to push back, arguing coercion, lack of direct evidence, blaming systemic flaws for Yu's paranoia. But their words fell flat in the face of the damning evidence and the raw testimony of those who had loved Yu most. Public opinion had already condemned Zhang and his accomplices, now the lot prepared to do the same. As the proceedings drew toward their climax, tension mounted to a fever pitch. The judge shuffled the sentencing documents, his face grave, his voice lowering as he addressed the court. Cameras zoomed in on the accused, every flicker of expression broadcast live to millions watching across the country and beyond. The prosecution demanded the ultimate penalty for Zhang Yuxuan, citing his role as mastermind, orchestrator, and beneficiary of Yu's death. For the others, lengthy prison terms were sought, reflecting their complicity in the crime. At the courthouse, the crowd grew restless, chanting slogans that carried through the cold Beijing air. Justice for you, Menglong. Justice for you. Some clutched flowers, others candles, their eyes glued to the giant screen that mirrored the courtroom inside. In Seoul, Tokyo, London, and Los Angeles, fans gathered in solidarity, watching live streams, holding placards, sending messages of support to Yu's grieving family. The world had turned this case into a global cause, and now the moment of truth was seconds away. Inside, the judge's words cut through the silence like a blade. This court recognizes the severity of the crime committed. The evidence presented leaves no doubt of premeditated intent, of profit gained through violence. Lives shattered by greed. The entire room seemed to lean forward, breath held, hearts pounding. Zhang Yuxuan's jaw twitched, but still he did not flinch. 3 accomplices stared at the floor, tears streaming freely now, their shoulders shaking. The judge paused, letting the weight of the silence bear down on everyone present. Cameras captured the trembling lips of Yu's mother, the clenched fists of Xing Fei, the tense posture of the prosecutor. The live stream audience, millions strong, hit social media with frantic comments, "Say it already, justice must be served, death penalty now." And then the words came. Stark and final, "This court will now deliver its sentencing." The courtroom erupted into gasps, muffled cries, and the sound of frantic scribbling by reporters. Camera panned slowly across the defendants' faces, on Zhang Yuxuan's impassive expression, before returning to the judge who held the power of justice in his hands. The live stream flickered as the verdict was about to be read. Outside, the crowd roared louder, surging forward against barricades, desperate to hear the words that would decide whether justice had truly come for Yu Menglong. The gavel struck again, echoing like thunder, and the world leaned closer to its screens. The silence that followed was unbearable. For a moment, the air in the Chaoyang District People's Court felt frozen in time, as if even the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then the presiding judge leaned forward, his voice deep and deliberate, each word striking like a drumbeat. "Defendant Zhang Yuxuan," he began, "for the crime of premeditated murder, orchestrating the death of Yu Menglong, and for profiting from this tragedy, this court sentences you to death." The words echoed through the chamber like thunder. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Some cried out in shock. Others sobbed with relief, while reporters scrambled to capture the moment that would define the case forever. Zhang Yuxuan's face twitched only slightly, tightening as if to contain any flicker of emotion. Cameras zoomed in mercilessly, broadcasting his pale, stoic expression to millions of viewers around the world. Yu Menglong's mother collapsed into tears, clutching her husband's arm as her body shook with grief and release. Xing Fei covered her mouth with trembling hands, her eyes overflowing as she whispered, "Finally, finally." Fans gathered outside the courthouse erupted in cries and cheers, their chants of justice for Yu Menglong, rising like a wave that swept across the city. On the giant screen in the square, the image of the judge delivering the death sentence replayed again and again. Petition fueling the crowd's roar. But the sentencing was not yet over. The judge turned his gaze to the 3 accomplices, who trembled under the weight of their fate. His words were merciless, lining their roles in the crime, how they had aided Zhang Yuxuan in planning, intimidating, and carrying out the act that silenced Yu Menglong. "For the severity of your crimes," he declared, "but considering your roles as accomplices rather than masterminds, this court sentences you to terms of imprisonment as follows: 20 years, 22 years, and 25 years respectively." The sobbing of the accomplices filled the courtroom. One collapsed into his chair, hands over his face, while another clung to the rail, shaking violently as guards moved closer. A woman among them wept uncontrollably, her voice hoarse as she pleaded for forgiveness. But the sentence was final, and the gavel came down with decisive force. The live stream audience exploded in commentary. On Weibo, hashtags surged into the millions. "Justice for Yu Menglong. Zhang Yuxuan sentenced. Death penalty live." International outlets rushed to broadcast a breaking news. Their headlines stark and sensational: "Mastermind of Yu Menglong's murder sentenced to death in live trial, BBC. China delivers justice in Yu Menglong case, CNN. Fans worldwide witness sentencing live, NHK." Outside the courthouse, the scene was electric. Fans waved banners with Yu's name, tears streaming down their faces as they embraced one another. Some knelt on the ground, clutching candles, whispering prayers of thanks that justice had finally been served. Others shouted angrily, demanding harsher punishment for the accomplices, insisting that 20 years was not enough for those who had helped orchestrate such a brutal crime. The divide was sharp, but the overall sentiment was clear: the death of Menglong had not been ignored, and his killers would not walk free. Inside the courtroom, Yu's family spoke briefly to reporters. His father's voice shook with emotion as he said, "This cannot bring my son back. But at least today, the world acknowledges what happened to him. At least today, justice has been declared." His mother, still clutching tissues, added softly, "Menglong, you can rest now." Xing Fei, the sentencing was both a victory and a wound torn open anew. As cameras surrounded her, she refused to make a public statement, instead walking silently out of the courtroom, her head bowed, tears tracing lines down her face. But later, on her social media, she wrote a single line that resonated with millions: "He knew he would be killed. Today, they heard him." The aftermath rippled across China and beyond. Universities held vigils, students lighting lanterns in Yu's memory. In Seoul and New York, fans gathered outside Chinese embassies, chanting for justice and solidarity. In London, a massive projection of Yu's face lit up a building near Trafalgar Square, accompanied by the words "Justice declared." The case had transcended borders, becoming not just a legal proceeding, global reckoning. Yet amid the relief, controversy lingered. Debates erupted on whether the death penalty was truly justice or simply vengeance. Human rights groups condemned the execution order, arguing that it perpetuated a cycle of violence, countered that Zhang Yuxuan's crimes demanded nothing less than the ultimate punishment, that only death could balance the scales of a life so cruelly stolen. Online forums blazed with arguments. But for Yu's supporters, the verdict was final: justice had been seen, and it had been served. Sentencing also sparked a wave of introspection within the Chinese entertainment industry. Questions of corruption, exploitation, abuse of power resurfaced with ferocity. How many others had been pressured into silence? How many careers had been destroyed by shadowy deals and ruthless profiteers? Yu's death became a symbol. His diary and messages transformed into rallying cries for reform. Fans declared they would never stop demanding transparency. The industry must cleanse itself of the darkness that had claimed one of its brightest stars. Meanwhile, the fate of the three accomplices loomed large. 20 to 25-year sentences guaranteed decades behind bars. But the public remained divided on whether their punishments were sufficient. Some argued that they had been pawns in Zhang Yuxuan's scheme, driven by fear or greed. Others insisted that anyone who participated in murder deserved no mercy. For the accomplices themselves, the reality was stark: their lives had been shattered, their futures erased, names forever tied to the murder of Menglong. For Zhang Yuxuan, the countdown had begun. Appeals might be filed. The death penalty in China is final and swift once upheld. His empire, once vast and powerful, crumbled overnight. Business partners abandoned him. Companies cut ties, and his name became synonymous with greed, corruption, and murder. The man who once moved like a shadow in the industry now awaited his fate in a cell, stripped of influence, awaiting the day justice would be carried out in full. As the sun set over Beijing that night, thousands of fans returned to the site of Menglong's death, candles in hand. In the streets with flowers and posters, their voices rising together in songs he once performed, their tears reflecting the flickering candlelight. The words painted across banners and whispered through the crowd carried the weight of both sorrow and triumph: justice has been declared. The live stream replayed across platforms, a haunting reminder of the gravity of the moment. Millions watched again and again the instant when the judge's voice rang out, sealing the fate of those who had taken Menglong's life. It was history, tragedy, and justice entwined in one unforgettable spectacle. In the end, the question that had haunted the world, who benefited after Menglong's death, was answered not just in financial records or whispered conspiracies, but in the courtroom, where the mastermind and his accomplices were named, tried, and sentenced. Justice had been slow, painful, incomplete in the eyes of many, but it had finally spoken. The legacy of Menglong now lived on, not only in his art but in the movement his death ignited. His diary, his messages, His warnings, they had not been in vain. And though the pain of his loss could never be erased, the world could finally say that his voice had been heard. Justice had been declared.